ever just been sitting there, maybe in a classroom or even like a meeting, and really felt someone looking at you, like that feeling where their eyes are just like on you and you can feel it even if you're not looking back. Powerful stuff, right?
Today, we're going to jump into all that, how eye contact, particularly between teachers and students when they're doing group work, like in secondary math class, actually connects to the teacher's overall behavior.
Yeah, you just sort of feel it, don't you? That like a teacher looking at you can mean different things in different situations. But can you imagine like actually tracking and analyzing every little glance? Well, that's what we're diving into today. We're looking at a research article, and get this title: The Relation Between Teacher-Student Eye Contact and Teachers' Interpersonal Behavior During Group Work. It was published in Educational Psychology Review back in 2021. And this study did something really cool. They used multiple person mobile gaze tracking. So
Okay.
no more just asking teachers about how they interact. This research actually like saw it happening in real time through like the teacher's eyes and the student's eyes.
It's really getting into those nitty-gritty details, isn't it?
For sure. So our mission in this deep dive is to understand how these tiny, tiny interactions, like a quick glance or a long stare, can actually reveal so much about what's going on in the classroom and maybe even tell us something about what good teaching looks like.
Totally.
Okay, so to really get into this, we've got to understand some key ideas. The first one is something called interpersonal theory.
Right.
What is that all about?
So basically, it's interpersonal theory sees interactions between people as a kind of constant back and forth. Think of it maybe like a tennis match, right? One person serves, the other person returns the serve, and it just keeps going back and forth. So each action is a response to the one before it, and then sets up the next one.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. So within that back and forth, the researchers in this study were particularly interested in two kinds of behavior. They call it agency and communion. So when they say agency, what exactly are they talking about? It's not about like booking actors and stuff, right?
No.
Okay.
No, in this context, agency means actions that show that a person wants to be seen as different, distinct, and to have influence. Think about a teacher who's leading a discussion or setting expectations for the class, or maybe guiding students toward a specific answer. It's kind of like saying, I'm in charge here, or I have a specific role.
So agency is kind of like being the driver, the one who's like making things happen.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, and then there's communion. That sounds a little more like touchy-feely.
Right. So communion is all about the behaviors that show a desire for connection and belonging. This could be a teacher offering encouragement or showing warmth towards the students, or maybe actively listening to their ideas. It's more about creating a we're all in this together kind of feeling. And what's really interesting here is that the research shows that really good teachers, they usually have a good mix of both agency and communion. They need to be able to lead, but they also got to connect with their students, right, to make it a good learning environment.
Yeah, finding that balance, it sounds tricky. So how did these researchers actually track all of this stuff? I mean, the eye movements and all the different teacher behaviors, like in a real classroom.
Well, they used a really cool approach. They collected data from 3 ninth-grade math classes in Finland, and there were 3 experienced teachers. They didn't use their real names, so in the study they're called Joanne, Fred, and Lily, and they had 47 students in total.
Oh, wow. So it's not just like theoretical, it's really looking at what's going on in real classrooms.
Yeah.
And what about the tech? How did they track the eyes?
Oh, yeah, so they use these things called mobile gaze tracking glasses.
Mm.
So picture these special glasses that have teeny tiny cameras built in, and they record exactly where the person wearing the glasses are looking, like in real time. They also capture the whole field of vision. So they gave these glasses to the teachers, and then they picked a few students in each class, and those students got the glasses too.
Whoa, that's got to be a ton of data. Like, how do you even begin to make sense of all those eye movements?
Right, so they did this thing called continuous coding. So first they recorded all the classes on video, and then they had trained researchers use this special computer joystick method to continuously code the teacher's behavior, the interpersonal behavior. So one axis on the joystick was for communion, think of it as a scale from unfriendly to friendly, and then the other axis on the joystick was for agency, that was more submissive to dominant. And so as they watched the videos, they would move the joystick to like track all the little changes in the teacher's behavior. And they also did this really important thing where they made sure that all the researchers agreed on like how to code those behaviors. So that means that the data is pretty reliable.
It's amazing. So they're literally using a joystick to code behavior.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's cool. And it let them like look at the data in a
Yeah.
really detailed way.
And so what about the gaze data? What kinds of looking were they tracking?
So they had a few key categories. There was teacher gaze at student face, which was just, the teacher looking at a student. Then there was teacher-started dyadic eye contact, which is like that mutual eye contact where both the teacher and the student are looking at each other's faces. And then there was student-started dyadic eye contact, which is the same thing, but the student starts it. And finally, there was student gaze at teacher face, which is just the student looking at the teacher's face. And then they also like really carefully measured how long each of these looks lasted.
So they're really breaking it down.
Yeah.
That's cool. So after all that tracking and coding, did they find any like big patterns? What were the kind of overall results?
Well, one of the first things they noticed was that the one-sided gazes, those ones where either the teacher was looking at the student or the student was looking at the teacher, but it wasn't that back and forth eye contact. Those were actually way more common than those direct eye contacts. And another interesting finding was that the students actually initiated eye contact with their teachers more often than the other way around.
That's surprising. You'd think it'd be the teacher, right? Trying to make that connection more often.
You'd think so, yeah. And then when they started to look at those looking patterns along with like the teacher's behavior, they found that when the students were the ones looking at the teacher or when they initiated eye contact, that's when the teacher's communion, like their friendliness and approachability, was generally higher. But when it was the teacher who was initiating the eye contact or just gazing at the student, that's when their agency tended to be higher. There's like a subtle power dynamic going on there.
Yeah, I can see that. So when the teacher is the one in control of like who's looking at whom, that seems to match up with like a more teacher-centered dynamic.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so let's get more specific. What did they find out about the connection between the teacher's behavior and when they were looking at their students?
Okay, so when the teachers were just gazing at a student's face or when they were the ones to start that eye contact, those things often happened when their communion was lower and their agency was higher. So if you think back to what those words mean, that might be when the teacher is giving instructions or maybe setting boundaries or redirecting a student's attention, like times when they need to be more directive.
So that look from the teacher is like a way of saying, hey, pay attention, or this is what you need to be doing.
Yeah, exactly. But here's where it gets even more interesting. They found that the longer a teacher looked at a student, even if they didn't actually make eye contact, the more it tended to line up with higher communion from that teacher. And this was especially true for Joanne. So for her, those longer looks, that sustained attention, the students might have seen that as a sign that she cared. It's like saying, I'm here for you. So not all looking is created equal.
Right. So a quick glance could be more about like giving directions, but a longer, more, I don't know, a warmer look might be more about connection.
Exactly. But we also saw differences between the teachers.
Yeah.
For Fred, his longer gazes actually went along with higher agency. So for him, looking longer was more about emphasizing a point or making sure a student got it.
Hmm.
And one more thing, when Joanne started the eye contact, those eye contacts were shorter when her agency was high, but they were longer when her communion was high. It really shows how teachers are using eye contact in all these different ways depending on what they're trying to do in that moment.
Wow. So Joanne, Fred, and Lily all have their own ways of doing this. That's interesting. Okay, so let's flip it around again. What about when the students were looking at the teacher? How did the teacher's behavior relate to that?
This is a good one. For all three teachers, the students tended to look at them more often and for longer when the teacher was showing more communion.
Hmm.
Which, makes sense. You're more likely to look at someone who seems friendly and supportive, right?
Definitely, yeah.
And in fact, when the students were gazing at the teacher, the average communion level for that teacher was way higher than for any other kind of looking. So if a student's looking at you, that's probably a pretty good sign that you're coming across as supportive and engaged.
It's like a nonverbal feedback. That's so cool.
Yeah, totally. Now, with agency, it was a little more complicated. In general, the teachers actually showed lower agency when the students were looking at them. This might mean that students look more when the teacher is not being so directive, like when the students are working and the teacher's walking around and observing rather than like leading from the front. And there's always a but, Joanne did things differently again. Her agency was higher when the students were looking at her. So the researchers think this might be because her teaching style, when she did take charge, was really good at getting the students' attention.
So when Joanne stepped in to lead, the students really focused. It's so interesting how each teacher's style plays out in these like little nonverbal moments. Okay, what about those times when the student was the one to start the eye contact?
Yeah, so those student-initiated eye contacts usually happen when the teacher was showing pretty high communion and really low agency. So that suggests that maybe the students are looking for a connection or reassurance or help when they like make that direct eye contact with the teacher. And as for how long those eye contacts lasted, well, for Joanne, longer eye contact meant she was showing more communion. But for Fred, it was the opposite. When the student started the eye contact and held it for longer, Fred's communion was actually lower.
Okay, another difference between Fred and Joanne. What was going on with Fred there?
So the researchers thought that maybe those times for Fred were when he was scaffolding, like trying to help the students through a problem. But they also noticed that sometimes those student-initiated eye contacts weren't super productive, maybe because the student was confused or like off task. But generally across all the teachers, longer student-initiated eye contact happened when the teacher's agency was lower. So again, it seems like the students are looking for help when the teacher's not being so directive.
So it's kind of like when the student makes that eye contact, they're saying, hey, I need some support. And the teacher's response is shaped by how much they're like actively leading at that moment. But you mentioned that Fred's a little different. Can you like give us some examples from the study to show how this all plays out?
Oh yeah, there were some really good ones. So with Lily, there was this time when a student, they called him Student X in the study, wanted to show Lily his answer. So he actually walked right up to her and like showed her his work. And at first, Lily's agency was pretty low because she was responding to the student. But then she looked around and saw that another student, Student Y, had a really good answer. And that's when Lily's agency and communion both went up. She started giving more instructions and praising Student Y. So you can see how a student's look can actually change what the teacher does next.
It's like that tennis match back and forth you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Cool. What about an example from Joanne?
Okay, with Joanne, there was this time when a student A, was late to class. So Joanne was getting him caught up, and she was being really directive, like high agency, but also really supportive, high communion. But the cool thing was that two other students, Student B and Student C, who already knew the stuff, they were also watching Joanne really closely. They were totally focused on her. And the researchers think it's because Joanne was so clear and confident and directive that she just naturally got everyone's attention. Even though she wasn't talking to them directly, it just shows how a teacher's energy can, like, draw students in, even if they're not actively participating.
That's really cool. What about Fred? Any good examples with him?
Oh, yeah. There was this time when Fred was trying to get his group started on a really hard problem. He was scaffolding, giving them some hints. But the students started getting a little rowdy, and Fred's communion went down because he was trying to get them back on track. His agency went up. And right then, as Fred was getting more directive, one of the students made eye contact with him. And it was like a turning point. The student finally asked a question about the problem. So even though things were kind of tense, that eye contact from the student helped bring the focus back to the learning.
It's interesting how even a look from a student who is like maybe misbehaving can still communicate something and change the way the teacher responds. Okay, one more example.
Okay, let's go back to Joanne. This time, it's during a group discussion. A student, Student D, is talking out loud about how he's solving the problem. He's really thinking it through. And Joanne is taking a step back. Low agency, high communion, letting the students lead. And Student D looks at Joanne, and it's almost like he's asking for her to confirm that he's on the right track. Like he wants to make sure she's hearing him.
So those little looks, they're like a whole conversation happening in the background.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Okay, so big picture now. What are the big takeaways from all this? Why should like anyone listening to this, whether they're a teacher or just, interested in how people interact, why should they care about this research?
Well, I think one of the most important things is that high communion from the teacher makes students more likely to look at them. And that's really important for building relationships, getting the students engaged, and maybe even helping them work together better.
Yeah.
So if you seem friendly and approachable, the students are more likely to like visually connect with you.
Yeah, that makes sense. Those relationships, those are so important.
Absolutely. And, this study also shows that students aren't just like passively receiving these looks. They're using eye contact too to like communicate their needs, ask for help, maybe even challenge the teacher or try to get their attention.
Get part of the conversation.
Exactly. And this idea of interpersonal adaptation, the study really supports that. Teachers and students are always adjusting to each other, and we can see those little adjustments in how they're looking at each other. A student who's like going along with things might avoid eye contact as a sign of respect, but a student who's frustrated might look directly at the teacher. So teachers can actually learn a lot about how a student is feeling and what they're thinking just by paying attention to their eyes. Even noticing when a student isn't looking at you could be just as important as noticing when they are.
It's like the eyes are telling a story.
Yeah. And the study also talks about the difference between a teacher's authority, like their overall power in the classroom, and their agency, which is more about their behavior in specific moments. And understanding that difference can help teachers be more mindful of their own nonverbal cues and how they're using them to create a good learning environment. And one more thing, a student's idea of whether a teacher is kind and cares about them, that idea is built up from all these tiny moments, and eye contact is definitely part of that. So if a teacher's always really directive and doesn't show much warmth, the students might start looking away more often as a way to, like, disengage.
So it's not just about what you say, it's how you look at them too.
Yeah.
Okay, to sum it all up, what's the key takeaway for anyone listening about teacher-student eye contact?
Well, I think the big takeaway is that teacher-student eye contact is this really complex and nuanced form of communication that reflects the balance between agency, like the need to lead, and communion, the desire to connect, in the classroom. So what might seem like just a quick look can actually tell you a lot about the relationship between the teacher and the student and how the learning process is going. It's like a silent language.
And it makes you wonder, how much we're communicating without even realizing it. So to our listeners, we'd love for you to think about how being more aware of your own eye contact and how other people are looking at you, how that might change the way you interact with people, whether you're a teacher or a parent or a leader or just, going about your day.
Yeah, that's a good question. Think back to when you were a student. Were there any teachers whose look made you feel like really seen or maybe even a little intimidated? And if you've ever been in a position of authority, think about how you used eye contact and what you noticed about how the people you were interacting with were looking at you.
So the eyes, they really can tell us a lot about how we connect with each other and how we learn. It's pretty amazing. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This is a fun one.
Yeah, really interesting.